Last episode, I talked with you guys about how these midlife shifts happen, and they're not just physical, right? They affect how we feel about ourselves, our lives, our roles as parents, friends, daughters, all the things. And I got a ton of feedback from you all saying, yes, that's how I feel. But no one ever talks about it. And I mentioned in that episode that I would go into a part two. And that's what I want to do today. I want to go deeper into that idea because this shift, if you're watching me on YouTube, I'm adjusting because Monkey, my Yorkie, is in my lap. He's trying to snuggle and get warm. It's freezing cold here. Anyway, squirrel, sorry. Um, it's not just about our bodies. During this transition through midlife, those changes happen. Sure, we lose weight, our hormones are fluctuating. There are all kinds of physical kinds of things that are going on. But there are shifts in, I dare say, bigger ways, deeper ways, more meaningful ways, and potentially ways that cause us to struggle on an identity level. There are shifts because, and I've said this before, if you follow me on social media, if you listen to this podcast, you've heard me talk about how this transition is a physical transition, but there's also a mental and emotional, there's a psychological component to this transition. And so that comes into play with the shifts that I'm talking about today. The shift in how you see yourself, the shift in your relationships, what you think about your purpose. Like, why am I here? We'll get existential in this episode a little bit, maybe too. And so if you're feeling unsettled, if, and some women describe this to me as, I feel crazy. I feel like I'm losing my mind. That is certainly the emotion, and those are the thoughts that came up in my mind when this started happening to me. And I didn't even realize that it was perimenopause. But I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I am losing my ever-loving mind. And so if you're having those kinds of thoughts or feelings, one, recognize that it's likely part of this perimenopausal shift or transition. It's normal, number two, and you're not alone. Now, does that make you feel better that you're not alone? I don't know. We say that all the time, right? But it's true. We oftentimes get into this sort of thinking that we're the only ones going through it. And that's part of what keeps us isolated. It's part of what keeps us from talking about these things in the way that I think that we should. So I do think, while it's cliche, I do think it's important for you to hear that you're not alone. So why does this midlife shift feel like such a crisis? It really isn't, but I know that it feels that way. So there's this common feeling among women. I hear this all the time from you. You feel like you're having a midlife crisis. You look around, you don't recognize your own life anymore. Your kids are older, so being mom is different. Your role as mom is different. A woman told me the other day when we were having a conversation about her moving into my 12-week program, she was like, my kids don't need me anymore. And just a few years ago, I was busy with ball games after school and running my daughter to and from her friends and different things she needed to go to. Now she's driving. She doesn't need that anymore. My older son is about to graduate from high school, and he basically has kind of taken on his own life and not had a need for me for a few years now. And so it was like, now she has the time that she's realizing that she doesn't recognize who she is as a mom anymore. And while work is still satisfying for many of us at that stage, we just we recognize that we don't really feel the same. Things are different. This can feel like a crisis. It can feel like such a change that everything is in turmoil for us. But I would challenge you to look at it a little bit differently, to think about it in terms of, rather than a crisis, that it can be an awakening for you. All right. And I want to talk a little bit about that awakening and what I mean by that and how that can come out in life and the kinds of things that I'm going to give you some tips for how you can navigate through it. But I want, I always want to share the science behind these things too, right? So there really are biological reasons for why this is happening. So our estrogen, I've talked about this before, but just kind of a quick recap. When we are young, it started surging in puberty. And we started going through puberty, got our period, estrogen started going up. It was increasing. And all through our childbearing years, that hormone played a huge role in making you who you were, in helping you to focus in certain ways. It really cultivated this nurturing kind of characteristic where you prioritized connection with people and helping and caregiving and making sure everyone else's needs were met before your own. And even if you're one of those women, and I am one of them, even if you're one of those women like me who says, well, I didn't really have that like nurture gene, we all have it. It's to varying degrees. Some of us extremely nurturing, some of us not as much, but that estrogen level is what produced that in us. It created that sense of taking care of others in us. Well, just like we went through that period of life where it was increasing and creating that caregiving, nurturing, motherly role in us, preparing us for childbirth and childbearing. I mean, this is all biological, right? Just like we go through that shift, another shift starts to happen. And that is when we get to perimenopause, that hormone starts to decline. And just like there was an impact on how it created us in this nurturing phase or stage of life, now as we move through perimenopause and we move through into menopause, estrogen declines and it fluctuates, and it can do that for a number of years. And for the first time in decades, your brain is not wired primarily, first and foremost, for everyone else. It's not focused first and foremost on caregiving. It starts to allow you to be focused on yourself. It's wired for you. Now, here's the thing. If you've been feeling restless about this, if you've been questioning things, if you've been feeling guilt over wanting something different, if you've been feeling selfish, I hear that a lot from women I talk to, that they feel selfish. What if it's not you being selfish? What if it's you finally being allowed to consider your own needs, your own desires, what makes you happy, exploring who you are again for the first time in years and years and years? Well, if you shift from that thought that this is a crisis and what is happening to me, shift from that to the idea that this is actually an awakening, it is making room in my life for me again. And you give yourself the opportunity to explore that without guilt. And you can do those in kind ways, but you can actually create a next stage of life, a second half of life that can be fabulous, exciting, unlike really anything that you've experienced before. And I'm not trying to get like woo on you. I'm just sharing with you what the opportunities can be if you shift your focus, if you shift your mindset around what is happening. Now, I would be remiss not to talk about all the ways that this kind of change can impact your life, potentially in negative ways. And then let's think about that and think about how you can not allow it to be negative, but really harness it in a positive way. So, for one, this time of life can have take a real toll on our marriage. It can take a real toll on other relationships that we have that are really important to us. There's a reason that the divorce rate spikes for those of us during this time of midlife. I mean, think about this. Our kids are grown, our roles have changed, like I mentioned, and suddenly you're spending more and more time with your partner who you have not spent a lot of time with for probably years because you've been focused on raising your kids, right? And for the first time in a while, you may come to this realization that you don't really know each other very well anymore. You don't have some of the same things in common anymore. You've quote unquote grown apart, right? For years, your lives have revolved around managing schedules, meeting your kids' needs, keeping things running in your household. And now all of a sudden you may find yourself asking, like, what do I want? I don't even know this person who I've spent the last 30 years with, and I can't stand to hear him breathe. One of my clients told me that. And I say that kind of in jest, but it's a reality. And that can feel very uncomfortable to you. Maybe it's not uncomfortable. Maybe it's something that you feel like I can finally escape, right? But it gives you, it creates a stir in you. Well, think about how that affects him or her, your partner. That can really feel threatening to people around you. And the majority of the women who I help are married to men. I mean, that's just the way that it is, right? Some of my clients have female partners, and let me tell you, when female partners are going through this at the same time, that creates its own set of issues, right? But since I mostly talk with women whose partners are men, one of the struggles, the huge struggles that comes up is that men don't get it. They don't understand. He doesn't understand what I'm going through. He doesn't understand why I'm so upset. He doesn't understand why I am bothered by the way my body looks. He says it doesn't matter. How can I make him understand? The thing is, they're not going to understand because biologically they are so drastically different from us that there's no way. So stop trying to make him understand. But also, and I'm not saying that this is our fault as women, but also we have to make room for keeping our mind open to how this all potentially makes him feel. And when we are going through this shift that he doesn't understand, and if we start focusing on ourselves after years and years of making sure that all of his needs are met and all of the needs are met, that could potentially feel threatening to him, right? And some partners really embrace this change, but many of the women that I talk to most often, their partners struggle with this shift. He may say things like, "What's going on? You've changed." I've even had women tell me that their male partners became suspicious of them or questioned them about their fidelity, those kinds of things. He thinks that I'm fooling around because I'm not interested in sex and I really don't have anything to talk to him about. Maybe I'm coming off as cold, those kinds of things. When in reality, you're just really finally showing up for yourself. But you can see how that can feel threatening to the other person. And again, this is why so many really happy marriages, long-standing marriages, wind up in divorce in their 50s. Our career, um, and our satisfaction and our fulfillment with our career is another big area where a shift can take place. Many women tell me, I used to love my job, for example, but I don't feel fulfilled by it anymore. And again, that's not a crisis, but it's an invitation for you to explore your interests at this stage in life. For years, maybe you have chosen safety, security, stability over a passion and a purpose that you felt because You thought, well, this is what my family needed. My family needs for me to keep a stable job, the security of my job, those kinds of things. And now you have the space to ask yourself, is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life? Do I want to teach for another 20 years? Do I want to work in the ER for the next 15 to 30 years, whatever it may be, right? And it really is. This is part of why so many of us choose a second career in midlife. Hell, I did it myself. I found myself during this time becoming more and more disillusioned with the work that I was doing in higher education. And while I didn't recognize it at first, this shift, this transition is part of what was going on. I did not feel aligned with the mission. I was older, wiser, had more clarity around what I wanted and who I wanted to be. At least I was coming into that. And I didn't want to be there anymore. So I took a shift in careers. A lot of the women who I help in our 12-week program, they go back to school. They get educated in another or a related field and they start a second career. They step into entrepreneurship. And it really can be a time where you're not starting over, but you're finally choosing yourself and getting real clarity around what is making you happy or what will make you happy. Friendships and families are the dynamics around those relationships. That's another huge area where this can impact us outside of this physical realm. When you've spent decades, this kind of goes back to, making sure everybody else is okay. The people around you get used to you being that version of you, that version who always makes all the gatherings, the family reunions, the Christmas get-togethers, make all the plans for it, make sure everybody is happy and comfortable and having a good time. And when you start making different choices around those kinds of things, when you start setting boundaries, when you start saying, no, you know what, I'm not going to be the one who organizes the huge family Christmas get together this year. Some people are not going to like that. And in any of these and all of these instances, oftentimes what we face is that people will say, you've changed. You've changed, right? And in all fairness, they're right. We have changed. But what they really mean, if we listen really closely, is I don't know how to relate to this version of you yet. I don't know how to relate to this version of you yet. And so at that point, we have a choice. We can step into this exploration and this new reality and this new happiness. And we can do that without guilt and without feeling selfish. But I think we can also do that in ways that feel kind and that help other people to adjust and react and respond accordingly. If those are relationships that we care deeply enough about that we want to. I'm not saying that you have to. I'm not at all saying that you have to try to salvage all of those relationships. It may be that it is better for you in your next stage to sever some relationships. That's totally fine. What I'm talking about is I want to give you some ways to navigate this change without you feeling lost, without you feeling guilty, and in a way that you can keep relationships and parts of your life intact if that's what's best for you. Okay. So I think the first and one of the biggest overarching steps is you embracing it as a redirection. Like I said, not a crisis, but an opportunity for an awakening. Instead of saying what's wrong with me, ask yourself, like, what is this time in life trying to show me? What can I learn about myself? Your life is not falling apart. I promise you, no matter how much it might feel like that from on some days, it's not falling apart. It's shifting and it's allowing you the opportunity to make room for you finally. A second point I would say in terms of our tip, in terms of navigating this, is Allow yourself to redefine what satisfaction, what fulfillment, what happiness, what joy actually looks like in life for you right now. What made me happy at 22, 24, 25 is not the same things that made me happy at 40, 45, and 50. And I hope it's not for you either, because that really is okay. That is normal. You are allowed to want something different at 45 or 50 than you wanted at 25. It is a huge reason, as I'm mentored younger women, and our own daughters, it's a huge reason that I say we are just too young to get married in our, early, even to our into our mid 20s, I believe, because we change so much during those years that we have to have time as a young woman to get to know ourselves and get to know that version of ourselves. But don't expect this version of you, even if you made really wise choices at 25, don't expect this version of you to want the same things that 25-year-old version of you wanted. Don't expect to be fulfilled by the same kinds of things. And again, that's why the career that you chose when you were working on your bachelor's degree might not fulfill you as a 50-year-old female. That's okay for you to want something different. This is one life we get, and we have the right to be happy in that life. The third, and this is a huge one. It was a big learning curve for me. And it was, something that made my relationship with my husband so much better. And this went both ways. Communicate with the people around you. Change is hard. It's hard for us going through this, but it's not just hard for you. It is hard for the people who love you. They're on the outside kind of looking in and not understanding. Talked about that a little while ago, especially if they're men. And instead of letting resentment build up, which is so easy to do, I know it is, have conversations about what it is that you're feeling, what it is that you need. If you need space, then have the conversation. Don't just cut yourself off, whether that's your partner, a really good friend, family members that you care about. People who truly love you are going to give you that space to adjust. They're going to respect you and your wishes. They're going to, even if they can't understand it, they're going to make room for what you're communicating to them and respect the boundaries and the space that you need to do that exploration. And frankly, the ones who don't, screw them anyway. That is something to really reflect on, and in terms of if you want those people in your life or not. But if you can't expect them to give you that space, you can't expect them to respect those boundaries if you don't communicate with them. And it doesn't mean you have to have all the answers, but you can. And it doesn't mean, let me say this too, and it doesn't mean that he's going to understand all of it if we're talking about your male partner. But we owe it to him to communicate as best as we can what's happening. And sometimes that can be as simple as, I don't understand. I'm confused. I'm feeling conflicted. I don't know what's going on with me, but I want to share with you that something is going on with me. And I don't understand it, so I don't expect you to, but can you just support me as I'm going through this? That goes a long way, a huge long way. Number four, I think you owe it to yourself to find that renewed sense of purpose. If you are feeling restless, instead of panicking, really try to explore what's happening with you. Think about questions, and this may sound simple, but think about questions like, what excites me right now? What do I want to try? And give yourself permission to be curious again, right? We encouraged our teenagers and our kids when they were young to try things out, right? Everything from new foods to new experiences to, doing things with friends. We encouraged our kids to find out who they were And the only way you find out who you are is by trying things. Well, think of this as like your second opportunity to go through that self-exploration period. What makes you happy? What kinds of, maybe it's a, taking a cooking class. Maybe it is going to the local college and taking some kind of classes that you wanted to take. Maybe it's, picking up painting. Maybe it's going and getting a real estate, like whatever it is, give yourself opportunities to figure out who you are in this stage of life. This is why I see so many women during this time in life start businesses, whether that's, a side business or they quit their main jobs and go into business. It's why I see women learn new skills or finally pursue something that they had been putting off because they were focused on raising their kids or what have you. It is a huge reason that so many women finally focus on their health. They focus on what they want physically too. And they talk with me about my 12-week program. I have heard countless times from women. They tell me things like, my kids went off to college. I'm unhappy with the weight that I have gained. I'm not as confident as I want to be. I don't feel sexy. And it's my time. And they enroll and start working on, and we work on all of these things, but they first give themselves permission to find their own happiness. And so I wanted to share with you some of these kinds of other ways that this transition impacts our lives. And I hope that they gave you some insight into, if you've seen friends get divorced, or you've seen, people do things that seemed crazy and out of character, like quitting their jobs or going back to college, or it gives you some insight into what is actually happening. And there's a scientific reason for it. But I also hope that it gave you some awareness around how you can better navigate this time. If you've been feeling unsettled, if you've been questioning things, or maybe even grieving a little bit the life that you thought you had, you're not alone. It is normal, and it can be just the beginning of a new version of you that's a happier version, that is maybe the version of you that you were always meant to be. And so instead of fearing this shift, what if you just leaned into it? What if you gave yourself the opportunity to be excited and explore it? Instead of feeling like you have to fight it and it's a bad thing, let it be a great thing in life. Let it lead you to the next phase that can be even better than the first phase. Because truly, midlife it's not about us losing ourselves. It's really truly about finding ourselves or meeting ourselves again. So I hope this episode shed a little light on things for you. I hope it made sense. I know I rambled quite a bit here, but this is the stuff that feels intangible, that I talk with our clients about so often, because it crops up as you start to work on the physical, the emotional, the psychological, the mental stuff seems to bubble to the surface. And working on your physical kind of makes room for you to work on this emotional and mental stuff. And that's really the exciting parts to me. That's the place where the rubber meets the road, if you will. And that's where you can really make a transformation that gives you true joy in your life. I know for me that's been the case. And I hope that all of you have that experience. So thanks for being here with me. As always, I enjoy these conversations, and I really am truly grateful that you spend time with me. So I'll see you right back here next time.